To say hello to everyone. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar. I'm Stephen Brown. I'm Senior Vice President of CFA Healthcare, and I'll be your moderator today. As any facilities management professional will tell you, it's impossible to measure what it's impossible to manage what cannot be measured. With heightened concerns across all industries regarding indoor air quality and how our buildings might be contributing to poor IAQ, it is now more important than ever to understand the contributing factors and how we can position ourselves to better respond and mitigate those risks real time. The EPA and other indoor air quality experts are urging schools as well as employers across all industries to assess and update their air quality systems. Congress, as you already know, has approved relief packaging with funding for schools and businesses to implement upgrades so that they can get their buildings up to code. Implementing such measures is vital to providing continuous, safe, in-person learning for a sustainable future. We'll be discussing those newly revised EPA standards shortly, but first, joining us here today is Randy Jowers from the Division of Smart Infrastructure at Siemens, and Dinesh Wadhwani, CEO of ThinkLight. Randy has spent the majority of his career in facilities management, serving both at the public school system level as well as with higher academic institutions. Most notably, Randy had spent 10 plus years working for the Shelby County School District, which is one of the largest districts in the country. Randy's primary role while at Shelby was to manage and oversee all major construction projects, such as build-outs, classrooms, additions, and mechanical upgrades. His experience lies in facilities and maintenance, as well as capital planning and project management. Now with Siemens, Randy works with school districts across the country in assisting them in integrating best-in-class technologies designed to help them operate their facilities more efficiently. Dinesh, the founder and CEO of ThinkLight, is an industry expert in the electronics and optics industry. His company ThinkLight is present in 14 countries, and they work with Fortune 500 companies, townships, and municipalities, as well as with an array of enterprises across the globe. Dinesh and his team of engineers create high-value technological solutions that solve larger problems beyond efficiency. Examples include pharmaceutical, agricultural, poultry, data centers, general health, and most recently, a technological solution that is to track levels of pathogens in the air that find their way into indoor public areas. In particular, this technology is focused on COVID-19 and its variants among a host of other viruses, so that they can be addressed and managed both immediately and effectively so as to maximize safety in any facility. Of note, Dinesh has won Inc. Magazine's 2015 Top Under 30 Entrepreneur of the Year Award, and in 2018 had been recognized among the top 50 power influencers in Massachusetts by the Boston Business Journal. Additionally, the White House has recognized Dinesh as being part of the top young entrepreneurs in the country, having made a tremendous impact in his community, as well as job creation in the US. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Dinesh, I'd like to begin with you, if that's all right. The EPA's Air Quality Index has been in use since the early 70s, and for good reason. There are a multitude of environmental factors that can not only seriously compromise human health, but cost millions in lost productivity and cleanup. You name it, you have ground level ozone, particle pollution, also known as particulate matter, including PM 2.5 and PM 10, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, etc. So why now, other than the obvious, should we be addressing indoor quality like never before and make it a top priority? Dinesh?
Sure. No, thank you, Steve. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having us, Randy and I. We appreciate it. And yeah, just to answer your question and to get the conversation going, it is being of paramount importance to a lot of professionals in the healthcare world and in infection control about controlling air quality. Unfortunately, it's been limited to those worlds until the pandemic, right? It took a global pandemic for people to believe that you share the air and hence share germs and viruses with other people in any other facility that's not a healthcare facility, right? People forget that you're breathing the same air as someone in a classroom or in your place of work or in a bank or in a supermarket, right? And when people enter healthcare facilities, they wear a mask typically, or they don't want to touch things around. And quite honestly, it's not that different than anywhere else. And with what happened and what we saw in 2020 in the world, it became front of mind. And I guess it's the accelerated education on what bad air quality can do for us, right? It can facilitate, it can accelerate contagion. It can spread disease very quickly using the air as a medium. In terms of managing your air quality and the metrics that you mentioned, there are several things in the air that there's no limit to what you want to track. As you said, there's some harmful in nitrous oxides, sulfates, ozone, PMs, particulate matter. But what I would like to kind of highlight today are what we are seeing in the industry and what facilities people care most about is the top two metrics of particulate matter and total volatile organic compounds. Now, particulate matter, as you know, and as the EPA has established, it's important to know what type of matter is in the air. Now, this is irrespective of its state. It could be solid, liquid, aerosol, or gas. And while tracking the size, PM 2.5 refers to 2.5 microns of weight of these particles and how concentrated they are in a meter cube of air and above, whereas PM 10 is the 10 microns and above. Now, what people don't realize is in these size ranges, you are capturing some important particulates in the air that can cause allergic reactions, some asthmas, and things like that. Excuse me. But however, the smaller you get down the scale, the more microscopic and what infection control refers to as viral load or bioload in the air, you see more and more of that. An interesting thing that I'd like to share is in the air, about 95% of the particles that exist is below 1 micron in size. And out of that, anything below 0.3 microns is where all the virus sits. So for example, COVID-19, which is on top of everyone's mind and irrespective of its variants, weighs 1.4 microns. I'm sorry, 0.14 microns. So it's in the 0.1 to 0.3 micron range. Common cold flu influenza is 0.1 microns. Tuberculosis, pertussis, all these airborne contagious diseases, the particles and how they exist in the air is in the sub 0.3 micron range. And hence, when you're talking about monitoring air quality, an important thing that any superintendent, any facility manager, any professional who's trying to monitor the air for safety, you want to make sure that the resolution of a monitor can go down to 0.1 microns, because that's where you find all the bioloads. And the second thing that I think is equally important is your volatile organic compounds. Now, these refer to the high pressure gas particles that are organic in its nature, as the name suggests. And this is a wide variety of chemicals, if you think about it, right? What comes from organic sources? It could be anything from food odor to coffee, from people, your furniture, computers. These days, the big one is cleaning detergents, right? You're spraying the place with disinfectant, every hour, more than we ever have. And there's these offset gases. All these are VOCs. Now, there are arguments that VOCs may be harmful for you, or if you inhale them for extended periods of time in higher concentrations, they could cause some effects. And some VOCs are not bad for you at all. But the main question here, or the main debate here is not to debate about each VOC. The nature of VOCs, irrespective of if they are good or bad or indifferent, is the fact that they move in the air at very high speeds, and they move in the air and go very long distances. Now, these high pressure gas particles act as the vehicles or the carriers of your 0.1 micron pathogens or viruses. So now, if you remember when COVID first hit, the first place that the CDC advised us not to go into were restaurants and hair salons. And the reason is because these are very rich VOC or high VOC areas because of the odors and the smells. So forget about 6 foot away. You could be 50 or 100 foot away from someone. If you're smelling that coffee, those are the VOCs that are traveling so quickly, and they have been inhaled and exhaled by God knows how many people, latching onto these bioloads or viral loads in the air. And that's how disease gets spread. So yes, there's EPA stuff that you must follow, and each one has an implication. But Steve, if I had to isolate the two most important things is, what is your viral load, your particulate matter of 0.1 microns, and what is the concentration of your VOCs? The PMs is for high danger, and the VOCs is a high risk, because now you can carry the loads in there. So I guess, Randy, I know you work a lot with schools. Can you share with us a little bit about what you are seeing in the school systems with regards to what metrics people are looking at and the importance of indoor air quality on campuses?
Yeah, Dinesh, appreciate the having me on. So I think, you mentioned it before. We thought about indoor air quality in the way of fresh air intake, and we really all got a crash course, unfortunately, into a lot of these things. And when I'm talking to educators around the country, particulate matter and TVOSCs are something they might have heard, but it's really not something that was in their everyday language. And it's something we all got a crash course on. So now we're measuring that. Before, you might have thought about bringing outside air in as a way to keep your students, awake or more refreshed, or their cognitive ability going up, or even as an energy saver. But now we're changing the whole subject. So we're going to do all those things. We're going to bring ventilation in, the outside air, but now we have to measure what's in there. So how do we verify, what we're bringing in, what's in there, to all the things you just mentioned, particulate matter, TVOSCs, as well as the things that we've always talked about, temperature, humidity, and things like that. So when we talk about indoor air quality, I think before it's been a buzzword in the industry for a long time, but it has a completely different meaning in the fact that we have to have, the real-time data to make decisions on whether we stay in this classroom, we move kids out of this. And the biggest thing that I've seen, Dinesh, is that before it would be a reactive approach. We would have somebody, maybe they would get sick, unfortunately, whether it was the flu and then it came into COVID-19. And we reacted to that by doing something. Let's bring in more outside air. Let's put in HEPA filtration, whatever it is. With, real-time data, and what we're talking about with indoor air quality is we're able to be proactive. We're going to measure this stuff, and we're going to be able to make decisions based off of real data rather than waiting for something to happen and then having to react to that.
That's quite amazing. So, and you mentioned a great point, Randy, is I didn't even bring up CO2, because CO2 historically has been used as a way to gather in population and how well ventilated the space is, right? And when you would bring in fresh air into a building, it was primarily to dilute the CO2 to ensure there's enough fresh air or oxygen for people to breathe in, right? And these days, it's more than just CO2, because you could have very few people in a room or a lot of people. And while that may give you some data, we don't know if these people are sick or unwell and are releasing unprecedented amounts of viral loads into the air. So what you're saying is, by knowing that, you will now know how to program the HVACs to bring in fresh air to always keep it at a safe level.
That's correct. And if we have too many people in the room, maybe the HVAC that's, that in that room can't support that load of people. And then we know we need to space them out. I think that, we've gone through and talked about space. 6 foot was always the rule. But maybe we have a space that's 300 square foot and we can't fit the 28 that we used to have in that room. But I think by monitoring that, we're able to make those decisions with real data, like I mentioned, rather than just having somebody get sick and then we're, same old cycling it over and over again.
Yeah. And if what we are seeing in the industry is this accelerated education of the importance of air quality, and well beyond healthcare, right? Healthcare is the obvious one, because you have people congregating that are unwell in the same room, and you have staff members, and you have people with compromised immune systems coming or staying at the hospital to get relief or to get treatment. Mm-hmm. And putting them together in the same room to share the same air, it's kind of a recipe for disaster. The tracking becomes obvious, right? We're seeing the same thing in workplaces as well, where people come and you want to get people confident to come back into the workspace. You want people to feel confident to, stop working from home. So that's also obvious. I know your experience, Randy, has been quite tremendous in schools. I know that's a big one where, you have implemented and now in the process of implementing several measures for BMS systems to control the air, for air quality systems. What is so special that you are seeing or unique to schools beyond the other, workplace and healthcare applications?
Well, I think that and we can talk workplace as well. I mean, when you talk about that, you can actually measure that in dollars and cents, right? If you have people that were out, I think it was mentioned that people are out, it's costing money. They have plenty of studies like net impacts $20 a square foot. So outside of just the school setting, I mean, those are measurables that companies, it's an investment to make that you can get an ROI on relatively quickly. But when you talk about the school settings, as soon as the pandemic started, the first thing is everybody, stay at home, right? And kids didn't go back to school. I can remember I have 4 myself. So they sitting at home at spring break, never went back, right? So we had to really be as safe as possible and as careful as possible. We don't want to send our kids back into these environments if it's not safe. And to be honest, most of us didn't know if it was safe. So I think that what we've seen is a lot of vetting and a lot of education for products, whether it was increased outside air. A lot of these school districts that we're seeing haven't had proper funding over the years. And that's kind of what we're seeing as an influx of federal funding, but how do you use that federal funding? And so it's really been an education for all of us. And it's taught us so much over the last, it seems like forever, but it's only been a couple of years, right? Whether it's talking about your filtration, the monitoring is key, whether we're talking about new HVAC, the preventative maintenance that goes into it. It's just been an education for everybody. And these are educators, right? In a lot of this, and this is college environments too. They shut down. They were some of the first to go back. I worked with some colleges here locally that had STEM programs and they wanted to get back in the classroom. Maybe it was an auto mechanic thing or paramedic or nurses, and they needed to keep them in the classroom. So it was, how do we get them back in there as soon as we can? So how do we do that? We're going to do all the measures that we talked about. We're going to increase the outside air. We're going to have the filtration, but then how do we monitor it? How do we validate that data? And that's where we've gotten to, Dinesh.
Yeah, that's a great point. I remember, our teams working with some schools, and here's a big one, is faculty members, right? They are most vulnerable, they are older, relatively weaker immune systems to the kids. We know that the older you are, the more risk averse you are, and not just to COVID. This is beyond COVID, just in general, right? Germs, bacteria, viral loads. And there were scenarios where classrooms were being monitored, or public areas like libraries and cafeterias and the gyms where people are breathing heavily and perspiring, and you have all these viral loads in the air. And now faculty members, for example, can say, well, there should be high CO2 here, but why is there a spike in the viral load? And maybe some people are sick, and let's get them tested and let's send them home for the day. We were in multiple scenarios where people use this data, to your point, proactively. And because there was no symptoms or not anyone behaving any awkwardly, but because of the air data being so concentrated in viral loads in a particular area, when those students got tested, turns out that 3 of them had COVID and 2 of them had a throat infection, right? Now, think about the number of people that just got saved from being in contact with those students who were unwell, right? And what is the implication of that? Are you seeing less and less with good air monitoring? Are you seeing less and less people forcing others to go get tested now? Like everybody in the school go get tested, or everyone at home go get tested, because now God knows how many more people would have gotten this if it wasn't caught early, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think technology was rolled out fast and hard. A lot of what you saw was, thermal cameras, and, not that those aren't great to use, but that's just one piece of the puzzle, right? And if somebody's walking through your front doors and that you detect that they have a temperature, they're already in your front doors, right? So I think that by being able to real-time monitor all of the metrics that you talked about, you are able to make those. And it's a little bit like the butterfly effect. I know everybody's heard flatten the curve, but that's literally what you're doing by being able to say, okay, this room has high measures. We need to get just this room tested. This room is measuring out perfectly. There's no reason to get them tested. So I think to your right, it's resources and being able to make those decisions from an educated point of view, not just by saying, well, we had 2 cases, let's test the whole school.
Right, right.
Randy and Dinesh, we do have a question that just came in from David Kennan. CO2 is just a way to measure the requirement is amount of the outside air required per student. How do we determine the occupancy? Did I read that correctly? CO2 is just a way to measure. The requirement is amount of outside air required per student. I guess how much outside air is required by students is the question, Randy and Dinesh.
Ron, you want to take that?
Yeah, I think that we obviously there's a lot of variables that are going to go into that. For me, I use the ASHRAE a lot, but what we're seeing lately is you're using the ASHRAE standards, but they're doubling that in some cases because you want to bring in more outside air. Of course, you have other things that come with that, whether that's humidity and all that. But I think that is ASHRAE is the best bet. That's always your baseline when it comes to CO2, outside air, things like that. Gotcha.
And Randy, also too, isn't it true that all of these schools and all of these businesses who have been able to open up and operate have spent an exorbitant amount on air filtration, from standalone purifiers to ionizers and what have you, and they really don't know that it's worked. And it would seem to me as though validation would come through a real-time monitoring. Has the investment in purification in your school or in your business been performing? And it seems to me as though real-time IAQ monitoring would provide that reassurance, or at least give you an accurate read, correct?
No, absolutely. And Dinesh and I have had these conversations over the last 6-7 months, is that you kind of toe in the line, whether when you're coming in behind, whether it was a filtration system or an ionizer, whatever it was, it's where you're not feeling like you're stepping on their toes. Like you mentioned, this is just validation of the work that's been done. And this is just ensuring safety for all the inhibitants, whether you're talking education in the workplace and a hospital. And that really should be our main goal at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
And just to chime in there too, it's about sizing it right. Because you see, everyone wants to do the right thing. Everyone wants to be safe, right? But how do we know it's enough? Are we overshooting and overspending, or are we undershooting it? But because we did something, we thought the place is actually safe. So a very common thing that we face when talking to facilities people is, okay, here's a classroom or here's a conference room, and how do I know what's the true number of capacity of people that can fit here safely? Right now, every space is so different. High ceiling heights, some places are ventilated differently. You may have 2 vents in that room versus 1 vent. How do you really know, right? And where we see monitoring be of great value is there's 2 parts of it. There's the initial sizing and there's the ongoing. So the initial sizing is, okay, let me put in a monitor in here and 5 people walk in. Oh, it's in the green by EPA standards. It's great and it's safe. 10 people walk in, it's green, it's great. Maybe when the 11th person walks in, it becomes yellow or orange. Okay, guys, here's how we now know that if the capacity of this room is 10 or less, this is how we want to use the space. But you know what? We're going to pack in 20 people in here. How do we go about it? Now, if I buy purification system X for $3,000, I can now go from 10 to 15 people in the room. But if I bought air purifier B for $10,000, I can now go from 10 people to 20 people in the room while still in the green. And now, what is that worth to me? So that's the initial value of knowing how to manage your investments and what's the real ROI. Because many times people find themselves buying purification measures out of fear or because they got to do something, and they don't know, they're just taking the salesperson's word for it. Right? Versus, hey, this is truly something I can see it, seeing is believing, right? So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, once you have done that exercise, there's the value in the ongoing monitoring, right? So now let's say you bought Purifier B in that same scenario. You have 20 people in here, it's on green, and that's great. And I guess it kind of stems back to the question we got earlier about the CO2 is, well, what happens is 3-4 months down the road, you have 20 people in there, and maybe today you got 30 or 40 people in there, for example. The CO2 level is now high. It's something to be alerted for, but not necessarily alarmed, because that's just one piece of the puzzle. What that will tell you is if the CO2 is high, but your viral loads are low, or your VOCs are low, it means you have a crowd in there now. There's more people in there that ought to be there. However, there's no high risk. There's no odors flying around to carry, all these viral loads. And the viral loads are not high enough to carry disease. So it's not anyone is sick in there. It's okay, right? And on the flip side, 6 months down the road, you could have very low CO2 levels where the population is low, but the PMs are high, right? And now you have something to be alerted for. So there's different pieces of the puzzle that if you're monitoring this in an ongoing fashion, you can now put the story together of what it means to you, to your space, to measure ROI.
Excellent. Thank you, Dinesh. We actually have a question that just came in from Steve Daniels. What do you consider as real-time monitoring other than CO2 testing?
I mean, if I understand what he meant, I mean, we are monitoring every second and reporting to a dashboard various metrics, right? So you can monitor CO2, as we all know, temperature, humidity, the particulate matter down to the 0.1 micron level, VOCs, which are these gases. So these are existing in the air in real time as people walk in, walk out, whatever the space is being used for. And the ability to track that and display to know what's happening per second, I guess that's the value of monitoring.
All right, perfect. And by the way, I'd actually gotten a write-in question on a person who couldn't make the webinar, but is going to see the recording. He wrote, air sensor technology have grown in recent years, but it appears that not all IAQ monitors are created equal, as different devices don't always test for the same targets. What would be considered, what should be considered in selecting an IAQ monitor that would ideally be used for a broad range of targets? And that kind of hinges on Steve's question, or David's question.
Yeah, Ryan, you want to take that?
Yeah, for me, when we're consulting with customers, the way that you pick it, similar to anything else, you got to vet it, and it's what it's going for. Dinesh mentioned, where COVID-19 lives, and it's the particulate matter that's 0.14. So that's kind of what stood out to me when we talk ThinkLight. And I'm not going to go into a sales pitch here. I don't even work for ThinkLight, but here we are. So that's kind of where you vet it and what you're measuring for. When we talked about the TVOCs, yes, he's right. Air monitoring sensors are a dime a dozen, but vetting it, even if it means paying more, I think when you're talking about a return on investment, it's immeasurable. When you're talking about not only keeping students, faculty, staff, or if you're the teller at a bank, or if you're Dinesh mentioned the supermarket, it's all the customers that are in there. I really think you got to vet it, and maybe it's spending more, but you're getting more.
Yeah, and to add to that, it's funny you mentioned that. I don't work for Siemens, but I think this is a big one. Is when you're monitoring the air, yes, PM.1. Everyone look for that. That's key. VOCs is key. CO2 helps as well, as we all know. But the ability of a good monitor is one that will not just give you the data, but one that has the opportunity to integrate with your BMS system or to integrate with other technologies, right? So, where Siemens, adds a lot of value in what they do is they use high-end sophisticated monitoring that can capture these metrics. But now, okay, a facilities person or a superintendent, you now know what's in the air. Option A is manually, you could use manual intervention, like we spoke about. Send those students home, get them tested, right? You're in a conference room, people are meeting in an office space, and the viral loads look high. Send them home, get them tested, right? It saves high amounts of headache, health, cost, economic value, lack of absences, all that stuff. But where we see the future going is, what if the HVAC system or other purification systems in the building knew that the viral loads are getting high, or the CO2 levels are getting high, or the VOCs are getting high because there's more activity happening in there, automatically the dampers should open up and bring in more fresh air. Or automatically they should start cycling the air more quickly to increase the level of filtration that happens. Now you have an autonomously controlled environment where it's constantly doing what it needs to do, all right? And I know, Randy, you mentioned ROI, but tracking the air is so critically important for health and safety, but there's also a hidden value in efficiency savings as well, right? Is unintended, but many times what we see in the real workplace, which is kind of unfortunate, is out of fear, everyone's cranking up the fresh air coming in. Everyone's cranking up the amount of air exchanges, and I see Randy smiling. He sees it all the time, and there's like 3 people in the room, right? And now, if you know the air quality is good, you can crank down the number of air exchanges and fresh air you bring in to the level where it's still in the green. And as more people come in, that's when you bring it back up. And now there's savings on energy, on wear and tear, and maintenance and filtration costs, and that way, you know, your air quality monitor is not giving you reliable data to be proactive about, but it's also allowing you to address it in a very automatic way.
Dinesh, we just received a question earlier from Ted Flesher, which I think hinges just on what you were talking about. Ted is asking, when monitoring, do you prefer doing room level monitoring or monitoring the HVAC ducts? If duct monitoring, do you lean on the supply or return for particle sensors?
That for me?
Yes, please.
Sure. So there is value in monitoring air quality in the ducts. And I love your take on this, Randy, as well. And because you have all the return air everyone's breathing, and that makes its way up. So what's the overall quality there, right? It will be quite valuable to get that information, right? That's the pro. The con is, because you're getting it from across all the building, right? The con is you don't know where exactly it's coming from, right? And the second thing is you don't know the lag, right? There's some sort of a lag for the air to make its way all the way up, right? So by reset standard, Fitwel standard, UL healthy buildings, which are all these acknowledgements that buildings have these days to ensure the well and safety, they require and highly recommend that if you're going to do indoor air quality, yes, the ducts gives you additional data, but they recommend that you want to have them in the actual rooms and zones that people are breathing, and ideally 3 to 7 foot off the ground, because 95% of the air we breathe comes from 3 to 7 foot off the ground. And in addition to that, it's in real time, right? You want to know what's happening in the score of the second as people walk in, because by the time it makes its way up into the ducts, it's probably too late. Right. So that's kind of how I look at it. Do you have any thoughts, Randy, on that?
No, I think that the reason that, I prefer the room monitoring is exactly what you said. I want to know what those inhibitants are breathing rather than, like you said, being in the ductwork. That's great to measure, but I want to know exactly what's going on in the air you're breathing in at all times.
Yeah, Randy, so we have a question from Judson Buchanan. Asking, does Siemens have the ability to connect with ThinkLight's dashboard and automatically increase air circulation via dampers, count people in a room, etc.? I think it's a great question.
Yeah, it is a great question. And Judson, the answer would be yes. We do have an integration with ThinkLight that's done a couple different ways. When you're talking about people counting, that would be all these things together would make a smart building, right? So they may be a couple different pieces, and we're bringing them into one ecosystem. What our front end might be Decigo CC, it might be Decigo Optic. There's a couple different ways to do it. So yes, the short answer is yes, and they would do it. Increasing the air circulation would be no different than the way we would do it with a BMS system. We would just set rules, set logic. If it gets to this, it's open up this 15%, 20%, whatever that is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Dinesh, anything to elaborate on that point?
No, and it comes down to, as we discussed earlier, about the power of integration, right? And beyond that of correcting it with the dampers, and that was a great question, Judson, and helping you correct it. To me, the additional layer on that is, now that it's doing that for you, how can you share this with all the stakeholders, whether internally or people walking in? Because now the big trend we are seeing, we work with hotel groups, we work with banks, we work with school systems, obviously. Now that they have spent all this money to correct the air, and now that they have also done the right thing to invest in air quality monitoring to justify those investments with the right accountability, making sure they're not over or under spending to get it done right, and the air is now in a good space. How can you make people feel comfortable, right? I remember we were talking with a very large multinational bank customer, and they spent millions, if not hundreds of millions, of all their properties globally, where they increased air exchanges, put filtration, all that good stuff. And they invested in monitors to do it correctly. They still couldn't get their employees to come back to the office, right? There's this new work from home trend, they're more comfortable. And the easy thing to say is, how do I know I'm safe, right? Or how do I know it's really, really safe? Or is it just my employer trying to get me back in? Now, with the monitors, the additional layer of this integration is being able to share it in a very tangible, easy to relate, meaningful way, right? So a good monitor should give you a dashboard, let's say, where you could say, here's the EPA standard of an air sample versus here's the live indoor air quality on a second by second basis in the conference room or in the lobby or in the cubicle area. Now, how reassuring is that to say, wow, the air quality is great, right? And to take it to the next level, it's so easy these days. Even the weather app on your phone shows you what the outdoor air quality is live from a local weather station. So, we've seen dashboards where you enter a lobby or an office area or an auditorium in a school, for example, or in a waiting room at a hospital, and you see what the live indoor air quality with the numbers changing per second, given what's happening, and the live outdoor air quality in that local zip code, which is basically quote unquote fresh air outside. And how amazing is it to see when you see the air quality inside is just as good or maybe even better than the fresh air outside. Now, how do you dispute that? That's the highest level of reassurance in my mind, right? And we see restaurants doing it. We see organizations giving faculties and key executive employees app access on their phone to these dashboards. So now they wake up in the morning, they see that the place has been cleaned, the air quality is awesome, it's safe, better than outdoors in many cases. I will come into the office. I'll ask my colleagues to come into the office. Or the faculty will now want to come in and they'll say, you know what? The classrooms are clean. Maybe the gymnasium, I'm not going to go there today. But it gives you that level of transparency of what to do to the data to get people to feel this sense of comfort.
Gotcha. To the point of where do you see the future of indoor air purification in buildings heading, Dinesh? Or you think this is going to be commonplace? Have industries been slow to adopt, but will they adopt? And if so, what are the motivating factors?
Yeah, pre-COVID, if I had to describe it, it was areas of critical circumstance would use this, like an operating room or a clean room or a hospital. And then when COVID hit and there was this accelerated education of the importance of clean air, we see today, and we are seeing a lot of early adapters saying, oh my God, in 2020, we were not prepared. And so that's what happened. In 2021, when the vaccines came, they said, you know what, maybe it's all going away. And then, we were warned at the beginning that this is cyclical. It's going to keep coming, right? And then Omicron comes, last fall, and it's like, oh my God, shame on COVID. It showed its ugly head one more time, and God knows what else is next. And now what we are seeing is, if facilities people are caught with the same surprise fall 2022, shame on us now, right? The future is, we understand this flu season, and COVID or no COVID, every 8 million people in the country get the influenza, right? Infection control people will tell you that there's a lot more nasty stuff and scary stuff in the air beyond COVID, right?
For sure.
And
Yeah.
and people have now understood how to take care of the air they breathe. Kind of like 10 years ago, there was all this thing of knowing where your food comes from. Is it organic? Is it from a local farm? Is it being used pesticide? And then also, where does your water come from? And now I think the next dimension is, what's in the air you're breathing. And if you think about it, air is the most important because we share the same air with people in the space. So we feel the future is in every building management system, in any facility, there's now budgets being created on how to implement measures or solutions that addresses somewhat, right, to any extent, either at a low extent or at a high extent, or let me just put in a monitor to begin with to see where I stand so I know how to go about this. So that for the future, irrespective of what may come or may not come, you now know how to manage this place. So that's how I kind of look at the future of it. It's kind of like when elevators were built in the building, right? It's a whole new industry. And when you realize this is a solution out there that's of such a value, how can you do without it?
Yeah, it would seem to me that, static testing is helpful at some level, Dinesh. But it would seem to me that manual inspections, performed every 30, 60, 90 days, on some routine basis, could seriously leave stakeholders exposed to some level of liability should an outbreak occur. Can you speak to maybe the legal implications of not doing everything you can beyond manual inspections? I mean, why you should not be settling for manual inspections?
It sounds very labor tedious, right? Versus being able to get the data from site remotely.
Right.
I know Siemens does like fire inspection or code inspection, right? I'm curious of that one because I don't know too much about that space. Would you see a correlation, Randy? Do you see a role where just like how there's fire code inspection, people are coming in to do air inspections?
Yeah, I think that what we've seen, we'll talk about the fire in a second, because right now we still have to do that. It's all driven UL and it's code, and you have to visually inspect it. But it's getting smarter as the time goes on. But what we're seeing, to be honest, it's human element, right? If you're counting on somebody to go in there and handheld device, whether it's measure something or they're going to measure each single square foot, they're probably not. I mean, you're just leaving it open to the human element. I think that not that we want to replace people by all means. We're going to have people process the data, right? But to me, that's what we've seen. And also, we all know about the Great Resignation, right? People are a lot harder to come by these days, Dinesh. So I think what we've seen is that if you can lean more on smarter buildings, smarter infrastructure, whether we're talking about air quality monitoring or whether it's a smart sprinkler monitor, or we're really monitoring things remotely more and more every day. And as we've gotten on, it used to be that you could monitor nothing on a fire system remotely, or you couldn't control it because of UL. And now those are starting to lack. So I think there will come a time where we are talking about we're doing inspections virtually, and there might be a call center. So to your point, that's the way that we're going with with everything.
That's definitely how you see the future, right? Because think about it too, as you were talking about that, right? Like fire inspection, you go in and you understand the safety or unsafety implication and you get it fixed, right?
That's right.
For air, I mean, if you go in and you see that the air quality is bad, it's probably too late already, right? So the importance of knowing it remotely, whether you have it, and this, I know UL Healthy Building does this, Fitwell building standards are all rising standards that require IAQ, and in order to get these plaques or these accolades for your building, they have access to your air quality to ensure that it's always at a good spot. So yeah, to your point, Randy, this is so much more efficient, but I think it's also safer. It just makes sense to do it using technology.
And not to mention, I mean, for the stakeholders, the reporting on live real-time IAQ monitoring is invaluable information that they can access and track historically. And that's something that just walk-through inspections cannot do. Doing them manually leaves room for omission, unintentional omissions. And so your records become skewed. And oftentimes you're being more reactive than proactive. So gentlemen, we promised our attendees that we were going to keep this to around 30-45 minutes. I think we have one more question for school district. From David Kennan. For the school districts to make, school districts to make motorized outside dampers required, this often requires legislative statute changes. Most states are simply required to meet OSHRA standards. Are we asking are we asking states to exceed these standards? The legal requirement is to meet standards such as OSHRA.
I think that, David, that'll be a case by case basis. So if they don't have motorized dampers and maybe they don't have a BMS system and they have to manually do that, that's a different topic altogether. But no, I wouldn't think we're asking states to change legislation or anything like that. I think it would be case by case, district, state to state, county to county. Dinesh, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. And also, as we said, every space is different, and how is it being used, right? Like I know in classrooms, there's 4 times more the density of people than in your typical workspace, right? What is the implication for that, right? And I think I think that's a great way to end this. Is that's where the importance of monitoring is so key, is versus just following a one size fits all or waiting for a mandate, which is going to be quite hard to cater effectively to all these variety of buildings and how they're being used in terms of application. But to say, hey, the goal is to do whatever you need to do to ensure that there's enough clean air in the room, whether you use ionization or you use purification or you use outdoor air coming in. You just want to make sure at the end of the day, with the results will count. And if I have 30 people in this area and the air quality is showing great by EPA standard, where it doesn't have the conditions for it to carry disease to others, I've done a good job, right? And now what's the most optimal and the safest way to do it? And I think monitoring comes in, for exactly questions like this it's hard to find a one size fits all. And sometimes to try to meet that standard, you end up throwing a lot of money away. Or sometimes you hit that standard and you think you've done it right, but people are still going to get sickness from each other because of the building is just the way it's set up. So it comes down to monitor your space, understand what is going on in there, and then make these calculated decisions on what you need to do to get it to a safe level.
All right, excellent, Dinesh. Randy, any last words?
Yeah, there was a couple questions from David before, and also from Judson on the people counting. If you have any questions, we do have that. Not trying to be a sales guy. If you want more information, we could just talk about it. Just reach out to me, find me on LinkedIn, whatever you want to do.
Whether you want to answer those questions now, I didn't.
No, it's fine. No, it's fine. Just to let them know, I think the question was, is there a device? And yes, there is. All
right. Dinesh, any last words?
Just thank you all for joining and for having us. And any questions you have, we are here to be a resource. Please feel free to reach out to myself. You can look me up on LinkedIn, the Think Light, or just reply to the invites you got from the webinar. We are happy to help advise everyone on monitoring, air purification. Same thing for Siemens, who's a strong partner of Think Light. Please reach out to Randy or myself. Any questions you have about air quality whatsoever, we'll be thrilled to help you guys out and be a resource.
Randy, Dinesh, I really do appreciate you taking time out of your busy days to help educate us. For the attendees, I thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We hope to have further webinars on IAQ because we feel as though it is timely and imperative that we understand the technologies that's available to us so that we can take the proper precautions to make the working environment and school environment as safe as possible. Again, everyone, thank you. Have a great remainder of the day. Bye now.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for having us. Thank you, Randy. Thank you, everyone, for joining.